View on.
Would you mind if I shared a joyous occasion which is happening days from now that is a milestone in my life?
I'd rather not. No, sure, go ahead.
Every day when I get home, I pull up in my driveway and I turn off my car and I reach up and I push the button to open my garage door.
Open your garage door. There's not even a car there.
That's right.
What are you doing there?
I use it to enter the house. I walk through the garage and then I walk through the door that's inside of the garage to get in my house, as opposed to walking just to the left of the garage and going in the front door.
Now, you do realize you use significantly more electricity than entering. I know that this is a concern of yours. As someone who really cares about energy efficiency, well, the garage door opening is much less energy efficient than you walking 10 more feet to go to the front door. But you can do whatever you want to, because I don't.
Don't try to mess up my milestone. Because what I do is then I close the garage door behind me, and that's where my shoes are kept. They're at the door from the garage into the house.
You take your shoes off in the garage?
I take my shoes off in the garage. I put on my slippers, and then I go in the house. I'm like Mr. Rogers. Put on my sweater, and then I go in the house. I'm like, hello, wife and kids and dog. Daddy's home. And every morning when I get out to come to work, I exit out. I exit through the house into the garage, and I put on my shoes. And if I'm going to the gym, I put on my heavy coat because I'm cold natured. I wear a heavy coat.
You keep your coat in the garage as
yeah,
well?
There's a coat rack in the garage. And then I
just interject. You do realize you're strange. I mean, it's cool. I respect every bit of it, and I'm glad that it makes you happy. But you do understand that some of the things
gotten to the thing that makes me happy.
No, some of the things that you've just described, I would, if I didn't know you, I'd be like, what else am I going to find out about this guy?
Well,
he keeps his coats and his shoes in his garage. Insists on entering through this portal and changing into a different person.
Portal. That's a good word. I treat it like my
it's
portal.
Just unusual. Unusual is great. I'm just making. Do you know that it's unusual?
Well, before I answer that, let me add this, just as a side note. When I get to the gym, I take off my coat and I turn it inside out. I hang it on a hook in the gym, and then I work out, get all sweaty. Then I put on my coat inside out, and then I go out to my car. I get my keys from what is now an internal pocket of my coat, because now I'm wearing it. I crank up my car and I drive home. When I get home, I open the garage door, I enter my portal, I take off the coat and turn it right side out and hang it back on the hook.
I understand.
Thereby keeping all the sweaty linkness
on the outside
of the coat.
Let me just say.
So then the next morning, I'm putting the unsweaty.
You understand? I respect it. I think that it's completely
genius.
It's all justified. It's all very well thought out. But I just learned something about you, and it's this weird insight after knowing you all this time. Sometimes
I haven't gotten to the milestone yet, but go ahead.
Sometimes I look at you as I'm speaking, or as other people are speaking, and I can tell that you're not present.
Oh, I thought you could cry.
That's and sometimes
that I'm not.
And I feel like I asked the question to myself. You know, we spent a lot of time together. I think I asked this question to myself 27 to 29 times. What is it? And you're coming up with these freaking systems. Is this what's going on when we're in the middle of something and you're just gone? Are you like thinking about check it inside out? That's it. Is that what the brain is? Is that where all the brain power is going? to these systems? Because I mean, that's a great system. I totally get it. I mean, yeah, I think people out there are gonna be like, I'm gonna do the inside out code thing. I understand. It's completely logical. It's interesting that you've got the systems are so intact and so developed.
Well, it's ironic because it's supposed to free me up for efficiencies for other things in life, like not having to wash my coat or worry about.
Because that's a big problem for other Americans.
Well, there's a best way to do everything, and
coat washing.
My industrial engineering degree, I don't know if it planted this information or if I
was attracted to that.
I was attracted to that discipline because of the way my brain thinks so systematically, superior to other people that I podcast with.
And as a child, I didn't know this about you. As kids don't think about this kind of stuff.
I wrote in the book of mentality that I petted my dog Tucker 5 times on the head.
But you didn't share that with me.
No, I didn't share that with anyone. Not even Tucker.
He did. Dogs can count to 3.
So this portal is a special place to me because it is. I'm so glad you called it a portal.
It's more like a holodeck.
It's like because it transfers me into the world and then back into my safe nest.
It's like the bridge. Well, it's like the bridge. What is the place on Star Trek when you materialize?
The holodeck.
No, the holodeck is where you go to experience like a virtual reality. But what is it called where they beam you up?
I really like Star Wars.
Well, Star Trek is the thinking man Star Wars.
Star Trek is the thinking man Star Wars.
Yeah, you heard it here, Gene Roddenberry. Oh gosh.
So it's a special place to me. The washer and dryer are also in there. I will say that, as well as all the cabinetry that was in my house when I first bought it, kitchen and everything. We also have all the rugs on the floor of the garage that we no longer want in the house for whatever decorating reasons no longer fit in the house.
Yeah, there's a lot of thought that's gone into it. I have noticed that.
So it kind of looks like a yurt in there. There's like matching rugs just everywhere. But there's also a couple of things which have plagued me. I cannot stand walking through what I believe to be. I thought my domain, now it's my portal to and from the world. It's cluttered. There's a lamp, 3 lamps, a chair, different stuff. There's a recliner that some friends let us borrow when Lily was going through her back surgery that now she doesn't need. So they don't want it back and they have to come and pick it up. So it's in the garage. There's a go-kart that I bought for the kids from a neighbor because we could drive it on our street. Because it's a private street legally. They never got into it. And there's a carrier that I bought to put on top of our car to hold luggage so that we could all go somewhere as a family.
Especially when you're just right next to it.
And I'm like, I can't get out of my portal walking around all this stuff, and I'm seeing it twice a day at least.
Especially in slippers.
And it became to symbolize clutter. Comes to symbolize everywhere in my life, but specifically here in my portal, just a lack of control over my life. And I just cannot walk through that multiple times a day. And I will tell you that today somebody came and picked up that go-kart. And for a whole year, I've been like, I'm gonna get rid of this go-kart. I put it on Craigslist, $200 or best offer. Within an hour, somebody's calling to come get it. Within an hour. I could have done this a year ago. Where are these people? Who wants a go-kart in Los Angeles?
How did you communicate with the Craigslist? Burner phone?
I got Jenna to talk to him. So I did not personally talk to him because I didn't want to bring that into the mix. And I didn't want to be there when they picked it up because I didn't want to know this was
You didn't want to say go-kart owned by
maybe I could have got more money, but
I could have got $350.
I didn't want to do
$350
because it was at my house. You don't really like people coming to your house on Craigslist, but I was that desperate to get rid of it.
Eat in the Starbucks. Drive the go-kart to Starbucks.
The moment we post, someone's like, I've been waiting for one of those, or whatever.
Oh, everybody's in the market for a go-kart. I'm in the market. You didn't even tell me or something.
And then we loaded up the recliner and got it out of there and just returned it to people. So we're not going to keep asking you to come get it. The loaner recliner, we're going to bring it to you tomorrow. This is going to be over because that's been 10 months.
They didn't just want it on.
And they were like, okay. They kind of did. Obviously, they didn't want it because it's been there for 10 months. They didn't want the recliner back.
They didn't want their daughter's
It's good.
recovered as well.
Yeah, but he had it in his office. Got rid of that, and I bought a rope hoist. Put that up, and it holds the carrier, and it levitates it above the garage door.
That sounds dangerous as well.
It's out off the floor. I could literally, I know this sounds crazy. What I'm about to say sounds crazy. I could literally park a car in my garage.
But you don't.
Just think about that for a second.
Nobody does that.
Nobody does that anywhere. Unless you live in like frigid places and you have.
Well, that's a lot of places.
Okay, that's fair.
Don't forget so soon what the weather is like in other places.
But nowhere where weather's not a factor does anybody use a garage other than keeping all the crap they don't want in their house.
Rainy places too, cold places and rainy places. We don't have cold, we don't have rain.
It's tough. I know it's tough for everybody, even if you got rain, to keep the clutter out of there. And I guarantee you, what I'm gonna do is
Dere kan faen 2 idioter, begge to. Jesus.
I'm gonna do it once and say I did it. And then you know what? The next day is gonna be something.
I drive over a slipper.
3 years ago, I got the garage cleaned up right when we moved in, and I was so proud. I went in the house and I was like, Christy, you gotta come out here and see this. And she was like, I'm in the middle of something. I'm like, no, you gotta come out here and see this. And I bring her out there by the arm. I open up I led her by the arm. Closed her eyes. Brought her out into the garage. Next to where the slippers are. Said, open your eyes. She opened her eyes. There was my car parked in the garage. I was like a kid who brought home straight A's for the first after failing.
She was upset.
First thing she said was, "You can't put a car in the garage. This is the laundry room." I was like, just let it stay here tonight.
Yeah, let it get a taste.
That one night it stayed there, and now 3 years later, it's about to happen again. One of those moments in your life. It's a milestone moment. You say, you know what? I had complete control over my life. One foot. It is an illusion.
You don't let her see it.
Illusion.
She's gonna come out there and hate it again. Don't leave her out.
I won't. You know it's just for me. Don't tell her. And the next day, I'll come home, I open the garage, and I'm gonna pull on in. 3 lamps, a chair, and a toy that Lando doesn't play with.
Yeah, that's what the garage is.
Dinosaur.
The garage is the staging for coffee.
I feel like I'm fresh. I feel like I'm a fresh bag of chips.
again, it's just a different way of looking at this. That's what makes it so great.
When I open that jar of peanut butter, take off that white seal underneath, and then I look, and it's a pristine. It's like ocean on the calmest. It's like a lake on the calmest morning, where you can just tiptoe across it like a ballerina. That's what that peanut butter like. Only once will that happen with every job.
That's true.
Only once in 3 years will that happen with my board. Well, you want to come over?
I'm proud of you. Yeah, I think
Your biscuits is supported by Mattress Firm.
well, there was a time before I sized up. I was smaller.
Okay.
And younger. I could fall asleep in the back of a car, on an airplane, on top of a fence post. There's many different scenarios I can find myself in where I could actually be involved. And that's the three most important things in my life at this point.
It matters. I'm into glow-in-the-dark stuff. Check out mattressfirm.com/podcast and see if you can get your glow-in-the-dark on. I don't know if there are any deals associated with that, but hey, let's find out together.
Mattressfirm.com/podcast. There you can learn how your sleeping could be mind, mentally improved.
Hey, Christy, guess what? I brought a bunch of glow-in-the-dark stuff for our bedroom. Oh, she's going to be so excited.
Here Biscuits is supported by Honey. You never turn down free money, right? Well, if you shop online without the best coupons, you're already paying too much. Fortunately, there's a free browser extension called Honey.
And it would just be so frustrating. And then at the end of it, most of the time, I wouldn't have found a reputable coupon, and I didn't save any money. But in 2 clicks, add Honey to any web browser for free. Then shop like you normally do. Honey scans and tests millions of coupons in the background. So no work from you. At checkout, Honey will automatically apply the best coupon to get you the biggest discount. It's beautiful.
Now, I like Nike products. I've got lots of Nike shoes. Well, I get my discount with Honey. I get 25% off of sale items at Nike.
Illusion of control.
I don't think you should tie your rope.
I'm not, but I'm not going to resist the feeling of feeling good because I'll put it in its place.
Allie B, if I were to get cryogenically frozen, when would I want to be woken up? And what age would I want to be frozen?
I've already answered this. The moment I pull that car into the garage,
What, if you're frozen?
freeze the whole thing.
Well, but you don't understand. It doesn't take that moment that you're experiencing freezing forever. It just takes some time. Very faint hope. Okay, there's a few things here. I've actually been thinking about a lot of things related to this.
Okay.
Not to short circuit this, but cryogenics is not a thing. Never will be. That's my completely unprofessional opinion. I think by the time we figure out how to actually free somebody and wake them up, we will have figured out a way to
transfer the
offload people's brains
the psyche
into a computer or whatever.
I mean, are you trying to say that that it's not possible, or that it won't be the most proficient thing to do, and you can just put it on a hard drive? That's much easier.
Well,
once you figure that out, this will be an archaic technique, even if it is possible.
I'm saying that the whole point of cryogenics is to essentially
Stall.
live forever.
Right. I thought you meant to stall until stuff is figured out.
We're talking about immortality ultimately here, right?
Sure.
Because there's the idea that in the physical world here, there is the ultimate goal of humanity, the thing that we're all kind of working towards with our technology, is never dying, defeating death, right? And cryogenics is just another way to defeat death. But I think that some of the interesting things that are happening in this area are much more promising than cryogenics. This stem cell stuff. Let's talk about that in a completely uninformed way. Uninformed.
Oh.
I will say, in one sense, these rabbit hole episodes are a lot like that Avery Brothers song where they talk about people love to talk on things they don't know about. Let me just say that is what is happening here. We read enough to be a little bit dangerous in a conversation, but not to be authoritative. So
you're talking about Mel Gibson bringing his doctor on Joe Rogan's podcast.
Yeah, but
I don't know if who cares? I mean, we're a podcast talking about a podcast that we listen to, but
I don't think that any of you come to listen to us speak for any sort of authoritative advice. If you do, I'm really concerned for you. But hopefully you come because this is an entertaining conversation, so that's what we're going to try to do. But we listen to...
Don't come for answers, come for thoughts.
We listened to Joe Rogan's podcast, and he had Mel Gibson on.
Mel Gibson brought his doctor. Who treated his elderly father, who was basically on his deathbed with a
bunch of problems, multiple organ failure.
He treated him down in Panama because it's not legal in the U.S. to treat someone with the type of stem cells that he was treated with intravenously, and maybe perhaps otherwise. But he made a dramatic recovery.
And I cannot remember the word. It starts with an M.
Mel.
Something. There's a certain type of stem cells that are super. Basically, without getting into the specifics, because we're not going to do it.
Listen to that episode of his podcast.
Yeah, it turns out that injecting these stem cells, both intravenously but also directly into the problem areas, is having these incredible effects. Basically, what they're seeing is that young stem cells that basically secrete things that then cause the cells in older people's bodies to behave like young cells, and to basically things to start happening differently. Like there's things that when you can look at a cell and you can see the mitochondria, you can see these other things in it, you can know, if you know anything about cells, cell biology, that this is an old cell and this is a new cell. New cells multiply very quickly, and they're healthy in all the different parts, but as we age, everything becomes less efficient, and that's why you don't heal as quickly, you don't repair yourself, and eventually you're basically slowly dying, you know, like, once you hit adulthood, you're basically just slowly dying. Mesenchymal stem cells.
Which are not embryonic stem cells.
Right, again, and that's one of the things, we'll say that stem cells were super controversial, probably continue to be super controversial, especially in the United States, because the impression was that these were embryonic, and they were like taking babies, and that's not at all what this is, that's not what's happening. I don't exactly know the science behind it, but it isn't that kind of thing. Some of them are from the umbilical cord that are donated, but they can also get some cells from your own body, and anyway, it's not actually a controversial thing, it just kind of feels that way. But anyway, what is happening with this, with the way that it's, like, ultimately, it's like Mel Gibson's dad was 92, had all these issues, he's 100 now, and he's as healthy as he's ever been, and they're reversing heart disease, they're healing people who have spinal cord injuries. This is not pseudoscience, this is not like anecdotal evidence that you see in some whack commercial. No, this is documented, peer-reviewed stuff that is happening where people,
even though we are only repeating the anecdotal evidence, but
but the doctor was not right. That wasn't anecdotal.
Okay, that's true.
That's well documented, multiple sources. It's been done multiple times. Like people who, like the story of a guy who was in his car wreck and could not walk, had no sensation under, below the vertebrae where the spinal cord injury was. Now the dude walks around. He's fine. He walks around. He has full mobility, full functionality of his everything below the belt, and he can walk, he can run, he can do anything. And it's because of these freaking stem cells that are repairing tissue in a way that was not possible before this.
That conversation definitely had this futuristic, magical ring to it. It's like, oh, this is what it's going to be. This is going to be such a commonplace treatment a decade from now. It felt like the way that people were talking about cryogenics years ago. Talking about Joe DiMaggio freezing himself or something like that. Walt Disney, which that's a myth. He did not freeze himself. I believe Michael Jackson had a chamber before he died.
But let's just say
it feels the same as cryogenics, but it's much more rooted in promising science.
And without getting into I don't want to bore you guys. I know some of you guys, when we talk about certain scientific concepts, you're like, well, I don't want to hear about this. I don't want to talk about that the whole time. And obviously, we don't know that much about it. We just listen to the podcast, and I've read a couple of books about it. Let's just assume that things will continue as they have been, and this technology, coupled with CRISPR and these other things that are going to continue to happen and develop.
You can just get it. So your lifestyle will be you just get an injection, or you'll hook up, like you'll charge your car, you'll go through your portal into your living room, you sit in a recliner, and then you'll hook up to your IVs of the stem cells, and you just get euthanized.
Yeah.
Not euthanized. Totally different thing.
Yeah. You'll be, for all intents and purposes. Again, I don't know when this will happen. But let's just assume that there will be a point in which we can continue human life indefinitely. Okay. Now, interesting book. I told you guys I've raved about the book *Sapiens*. Well, the same guy wrote *Homo Deus*, which is a follow-up to *Sapiens*, which is basically looking forward into the future. He just started this book. I'm a few chapters in, but he talks about this issue, the idea of we're all kind of trying to become immortal. That's what all the technology is kind of looking towards. And he talked about the idea of how we mortals take risks.
Speed trap reported ahead.
Which is not even that risky, but we might go skydiving, or you can ride in a car. We do things all the time that for certain moments the probability of us dying is greatly increased.
Like shoot a confetti popper at your face.
Exactly.
Point blank range.
And we do these things knowing that, well, I'm going to die someday. I mean, you don't think about it like that, but we live in a culture where we know that we've got 70, 80, 90 years and it's over. Well, his point was, if we get to a place where you can sustain human life indefinitely, people are going to become very, very different. They're going to look at risk a lot differently. It's like, man, I could get 500 years on this planet. I shouldn't go skydiving because I could be losing
so much.
300 years as opposed to, well, I'm going to die in 40 years anyway.
But then you've got like what Hollywood has taught us about the vampire demeanor.
It's sad at moments.
It's nihilist and defeat. I mean, it's like they're just grumpy. When you live that long and you encounter, well, first of all, they're encountering a lot of people who aren't living that long, so they are lonely.
Well, and also,
but they're grumpy.
They can only be seen. They can only come out at night. They have to kill people to live. There's a lot of negatives to being a vampire. That's why I'm never going to be one. I mean, of course, other than but let's just say that it is going to happen. I mean, it is interesting to think. Are we going to qualify? I mean, I was actually on the treadmill at the gym the other day, and I'd been listening to this book, and I was like working out, and I was like, I have to put the information into the treadmill so I can get my heart rate and all this.
Yeah.
Now, the first week I went to the gym, it was like weight. It was like 205, age 40. Ouch. Yeah, hurt
2 strikes.
I've been in there without even thinking about it. I've been reading this book.
Third strike would be likes easy listening music.
That's not an option.
Okay. Enjoys soft rock.
No, it's really just your age. Okay. You know what I put in? I didn't even make this connection until right now. You know what age I put in this week on the treadmill?
You put in a different age?
First of all, I put in 25.
Are you... What?
Now, the reason I did it is because if you put in 25, the target heart rate goes up significantly. So you have to work harder. And I was like, if I'm here, I need to work harder. But I was also thinking, I also need to work harder like I'm a 25-year-old because, well, if I'm going to live...
25-year-old treadmill might kill a 40-year-old man.
No, I held on. I was sweating a whole lot more. I did realize that a 40-year-old trying to be a 25-year-old on a treadmill is much uglier to watch than a 40-year-old just being a 40-year-old. The first week, it's just a 40-year-old on a 40-year-old treadmill, and I'm sweating a little bit, and then I'm getting off. A 40-year-old on a 25-year-old system, I was like sweating and making noise. I had my headphones on, listening to music.
You could feel that you were making
17
noise.
minutes into it, I realized you're breathing like really loud. But then I looked around and everyone else was on headphones, and they're all breathing and farting and stuff. Nobody's listening to each other.
Breathing and farting, that's the cycle of life.
But I just realized now that what I'm
Heavy traffic reported ahead.
Maybe there come this time when we solve the deepest mysteries of human longevity. Are we gonna be young enough where we can somehow be across the threshold and be taken on into the future? And then I started thinking, do I even want that? Do I want to be a vampire? Do I want to live to be 500? Or is 80, 90 years, is that the right time to live and then just be done?
Then you slowed that treadmill down to 40 again?
No, I'm staying on 25 because I want to be healthy and try to get my heart in shape.
Did you bring the coat to the gym?
No, I don't do that. I don't take a coat to the gym.
Okay, whatever. Okay.
But if I do, I'll wear it inside out.
That was my only follow-up question. I'm thinking.
Do you want to live forever? And if you do live forever, what happens, man? I mean, we did our 200-year plan as exercise and entertainment, back on GMM. But you talk about switching careers.
Well, I think this is. I mean, I do think exploring Allie's original question philosophically will kind of get at the same thing, because that is the implication there was, at what point would you want to be frozen so that when you woke up you could live from that point forward and maybe retain, like, we're 40. Well, I'm not 40. I am 39.
Oh, round up, sucker.
Our question was, how much longer do we want our bodies to deteriorate before we have the chance of drastically slowing that down at some point in the future, if that can happen? It's, do you want to live forever at just degrading a lot slower? I guess so. I mean, it's the same experience, except like for every 1 day we get now, you get 3. I think that seems like an easy yes for me. I don't.
But if there was a time in which you were going to be frozen, let's just say that this would work. I think the question is, what age will you have lived enough of the life on this side? Is it you get to be 70 and it's just like, okay, well, as you get to be 80, like when does life become more of a burden to live? And this is different for different people. But for some people, things get really, really difficult past a certain age. And
right.
And would you want to be frozen before that point?
I think at the point, here's the thing, I've got Christy, who I would, she would have to be frozen with me. I think you, and then I'd want you to be frozen with me, and then you'd want Jesse to be frozen with you, and then maybe, we don't want our kids to be frozen, so we got to wait for our kids to get to develop lives of their own, and then we reach a certain level of pride in knowing that they're achieving happiness in life, that they've, they got their own lives now. So obviously we're not going to freeze ourselves and let our kids go through grade school, high school, college without us. Peace out, kids.
Yeah, but if you wait until you're old, the kids have already lived their lives. You're probably a grandfather. They're adults.
No, but there's no point. I mean, when you start to think about that, it's like, okay, then my kids are on their own.
Then you got grandkids.
No, the kids are on their own. When do they start making a family of their own? You want to see that. You want to spectate that from the stands. You want to be involved in that. There's never a good time for me, with what's happening in my life right now, to pause it and say, you know what? I'll check back in 100 years from now when you can figure out how to drastically improve my quality of life from age 40 on.
Well, but
and then so by the time the people want to be frozen, I think they're either on their way out and it's too late, or it's just their life's not going well, so they want to hopefully wake up in an era when it can be better.
Well, part of this question is, I think the thing that we all fear is irrelevance, right? And I'm not talking about like the irrelevance that we fear as entertainers, nobody caring about what we have to say anymore, but just as a person. So there's just the way our society works. You get to be a certain age, and people just don't care what you think anymore. They care about you, right? So you got like your grandparents. You have 3 living grandparents, right? Mm-hmm. Lincoln is how old now? 80 something.
88.
Yeah. Now, you love him unconditionally, love him deeply. He's an 88-year-old man. He has done the things that he's going to do.
Right.
He's contributed 99% of things that he's going to contribute, right? And he's comfortable with that. He's fine with that.
Sure.
But at this point, like, you don't think of his opinion or his perspective. He doesn't carry the same weight that it carried when he was 58 and you were 8 or whatever, right?
Right.
So there's this point in which our society has just sort of said, you get to be this age, and it's just sort of like, you're old now. You matter, but you don't matter at the same time. Like, that's just this collective thing that people kind of do to old people. And I think that personally, almost exclusively out of a sense of pride, the idea of just not mattering, of just being a person who is in the room at a family gathering, and it's like, everybody, sure, we all love Grandpa Rhett. We all love him. But, we're talking about things that really matter, and at that point, he kind of checks out. I have a huge fear of that. Now, when I am 88, I'm not going to care about that. probably. I care about that now as a 40-year-old because I'm like putting myself into the body of my 88-year-old self.
Yeah, you're having a midlife crisis.
Well, it's not a midlife crisis. It's a fear of being old. It's a fear of being irrelevant. A midlife crisis is thinking that my life is over now. I love my life right now.
Parking mode on.
That's the part of getting old, not even death, just getting old that we fear. And so when I answer this question, I'm like, well, right when I feel like that's about to happen, when I'm about to become what I see as irrelevant, that's when I want to check out. And I feel bad even talking about it because I'm not trying to talk crap about old people. I'm just saying that this is just the way, if you're of a certain age, you can't even get hired, even if you're capable. Like, if you're a white-haired 70-year-old, and you're just as qualified as a brown-haired 30-year-old, and you'd be like, this guy is 70. Why does he want to work here? We don't value, we don't feel like old people have anything to offer. I'm not saying it's true. I'm just saying that that's just the way that.
Well, when it is true, it's a sad reality. Right. So what do you summarize your point?
I'm just saying, to answer Allie's question of when would I want to be cryogenically frozen if this was a legitimate thing? Because you were talking about, I want to spectate all these things. There'll never be a point in which I don't want to be a part of my family's life or whatever. I'm saying at the point that I become a burden is the point that I would want to check out.
And then it'll be too late, assuming that when they thaw you out in this thought exercise, that they can do something reversing, which that I think you can slow a lot. But the whole reversing thing, even the stem cell stuff we're talking about, I don't know that it seems still like a leap to say that it would make you young. It would just make you the best of the age.
We're assuming that you're going to basically do the same thing when you wake up, and then you're like, well, I was almost irrelevant when I was frozen, and now you wake me up and I'm just irrelevant again.
You know what? It's analogous. I don't want to go in another sci-fi direction, but I am. It's in a lot of ways analogous to who's going to go colonize Mars. And you're not going to take your kids. Maybe you take your wife, depending on the criteria and how many people are going. But I mean, I'm talking at first. At first, they're not taking a bunch of children to colonize Mars. I would assume not. But it's people checking out of their Earth lives forever. They're never coming back. They're going to go to Mars, and so they continue to live a life. But you have to live a certain type of life or have a certain level of autonomy to be comfortable with. I'm going to check out of this world and enter a new world. So I think there are people who are willing to do that. There are people that I'm not one of those people. When you've got kids that you're investing in, that's a big factor.
Yeah, I think we're probably talking about single, but I mean the people who volunteer to do this, and again, I'm kind of with Neil deGrasse Tyson on this. I don't understand why we're thinking about colonizing Mars when we've got a planet that we really need to be worrying about here that's actually habitable now, but may not be for much longer if we don't correct things.
Well, I think we should have all the irons in the fire, and we should have all types of people working on all
of
types
things. But let's just say, we're gonna talk about
enough brain power to go around.
Healthy 25-year-olds who are single or going with their partner, don't have children. They're saying bye to their parents. Maybe they don't have a good relationship with their parents. I mean, you're going to have plenty of candidates. I don't think you have to worry about that. But, it's interesting because we're talking about the ties that we have with our family. And this is totally natural, and I'm in complete agreement with you. That as you think about your life and you think about what commitments you can make and you can't make and how long you want to live, when you want to check out, when you want to be frozen, you're thinking about it in the context as a husband and a father. It's going to be very interesting. I think that a lot of our commitments in the way that we see family is based on our life expectancy. Meaning that if we get to a place where we can live forever, are you going to be with the same person forever? Like if you can ostensibly live to be 1,000 years old, and your kids are going to be 970 years old. You know what I'm saying? And they're going to have kids, and they're going to have kids. Like the way that
there's a space issue.
There's definitely a space issue.
That's like a capacity issue. But let's put that aside.
Let's just theoretically say that they continue, and maybe it's not every 30 years. Maybe a generation becomes 100 years or something like that. But you're still talking about 10 generations of people. Are you going to really care? Like, and think about think about the way that a family tree goes. You have 2 kids. They each have 2 kids. They each have 2 kids. You go 10 generations. We're talking about hundreds of people who are related to you. But because you're so freaking old, at a certain point,
it doesn't.
You're going to have no connection to them, even though they are your direct descendants, and but now they're contemporaries with you.
You have an embarrassment of riches of all these people that are related to you, but it's like walking down the street and you're like, odds are, I wouldn't be surprised given the odds that this person
I wouldn't care.
You couldn't help but not care, I think is your point. It's an interesting point.
And listen, and again,
because you can't maintain meaningful relationships with that many people. It doesn't matter what the blood connection is.
Right. And I'm not trying to get myself in trouble. I'm not trying to get you in trouble. I'm just talking theoretically here.
With our wives, you mean?
Yes. So let's not even talk about us. Let's just talk about people who are in relationships in general.
Bobby,
do you think
and
that if people can live forever
Jenny,
and they get married in the first 30 years of their lives, that the expectation culturally, now like the cultural expectation, traditionally speaking, is that you get married and you stay married and then you die, right? Till death do us part. Now, not everybody does that. There's a lot of people who get divorced for lots of different reasons. But the cultural sort of norm is that the expectation was that we would be together forever, even though half of couples don't.
Are we about to undo everything we talked about in last week's podcast?
No. See, don't think about about it in respect to your wife. Think about it as
Bobby and Jenny?
A cultural institution. There is absolutely
Parking
no
mode
way
off.
that the expectation would remain that you would stay with the same person until you were 1,000. Because I believe that the expectation to stay till death do us part is based on life expectancy. Coming back to my original argument, and if life expectancy isn't a thing, I just expect my life to go on forever. There's going to become some norm, and I think the norm will be based on being with somebody and producing another generation. And when that generation is
the same as you.
No. The moment in which you can no longer connect with the offspring. So you can connect with your grandkids because that already happens. You can connect with your great grandkids because that already happens. There are some people who connect with their great grandkids, but I feel like great grandkids. Now you're in a place where the emotional capacity for connection with great grandkids is so low. That's when you say, all right, it's been great. This has been an incredible relationship, and now we're going to leave and we're going to start and we're going to do this again.
The thing I do agree with is
That's
that it becomes like a corporate relationship. Like you're the CEO of a company. When a company gets so big, this does happen. The CEO of the company can't have a meaningful work relationship with certain people down the business structure. And I just think, you have, I don't know. I mean, you and I can be very heartless. So I'm trying to channel that person who's listening. No. Okay,
it's not heartless.
No. Here's what some people are saying right now. I'm going to try to channel it. And that is, there are people out there who have the capacity to love nations of people in a way that, like, we're just not.
Love nations. I love nations of people.
I love
all nations.
I love all nations. I love everybody. I'm just saying, as a unit of measurement, there are people who their love is unbounded. I just think that.
But we're
talking very practically, like practical mechanics of actual connection. There is a limitation to the human, to a human's ability to have a meaningful. You can have a love for a nation of people, but you can't have a connection. You can't have a specific relationships with that many individuals.
Yeah, well, I think it's 150, right? There's a certain. I don't know what the number is. It's the so-and-so number because somebody, some anthropologists determined that just based on hunter-gatherer heritage, that the human brain has the capacity to have meaningful relationships with 150 individuals, just based on tribe size, whatever. But so I don't want to say, because we're also talking about it. The way I broke it down was when you could no longer connect with the offspring. But you might be saying, but what about the partner that you're with? Isn't the love for your partner just going to continue indefinitely? I'm just saying that the expectation for how long the relationship would be would actually take on a much more practical approach. Because here's the thing: we like to think that this is just the way it's always been. But the fact is that, well, many different cultures, and probably most, the way that relationships were formed in the distant past was much different. In fact, humans were much more like animals in the distant past in that they were in polygamous relationships. I mean, that was when you go back to those 150 size tribes, it was a dude with multiple wives. You see that in all kinds of ancient texts, and there's lots of archaeological evidence of that. So that was the cultural norm at the time. So what I'm saying is that if things, and the reason that it was that way had all kinds of factors that contributed to what was the most efficient way to live at the time for multiple women to pair up with one man. It was the way the dynamics work. So I'm saying that in the distant future, if people are living forever, the dynamics, the expectations, and the cultural norms, and what we consider to be moral will change because it changes over time as circumstances change. And I don't think it's going to be this thing where it's just like, oh, well, that love isn't real. It's going to be like, no, that love was there for a certain time, and then both people are just like, okay, either we continue this or we don't, and it'll be based on so many different factors that we can't even begin. Like, that gets back to when are you going to wake up? When are you going to be introduced? Which we talked about a couple of podcasts ago. You might wake up at a time where so many things have changed, and we've tapped into the way our brain works, and we have no capacity to even understand the future that we've been put in.
Your mind explodes.
And then you're like, I shouldn't have woken up. Again, I agree with you. I'm not trying to be bleak about it. It's just the reality.
But the thing about staying paired up for life, even if that's eternity, and the argument of 50 years together, 60 years together, the type of thing of that seeming long, and to be celebrated as cultural achievement. I'm just wondering if you take it backwards to like when life based on life expectancy. That's what makes it awesome to say. Okay, if we're going to live this long and you're going to be partnered up for that long, that's to be celebrated. Well, let's go back to life expectancy when life expectancy was much less, and then being with somebody that long was, I'm sure, still celebrated. Or maybe, would you say it was no big deal when people were dying of the Black Plague or whatever it was called? Because then I'm saying if you stay together as long as you live, then relatively, then if you live for, if life expectancy is 250 years, it seems like the same principles would apply. It doesn't seem like that should change. The arguments that we were making on the previous podcast about how relationships, commitment in a loving partnership opens up a world of experience and enrichment that just moving to somebody else and starting over, which might be more amorous, you're missing out on something. I'm trying to make the argument that if I added another 150 years in my relationship with my wonderful wife, it would be that much more wonderful for ways that I could not anticipate. Because
that's not what I'm saying. Because you're talking about life expectancy. I'm talking about not suspended animation, basically not aging anymore. So I'm talking about indefinite life.
You're talking I know, but I'm incrementally getting there. So I'm just making an argument. Well, let's pull back to life expectancy 250 years. How do you feel about that? Well, I feel like I can make that argument. Now 500 years.
Well, okay, but you're also it's being a little unfair because you're putting it in personal terms. Obviously, if I put it in personal terms, I'm going to say that if I were to live to be 1,000, I would stay with Jesse all 1,000 years.
Yeah, and you know what? And we'll cut it right there. And what
Parking mode on.
And now we can just talk. We can just.
I'm not talking about it personally because my perspective that I bring to this and your perspective that you bring to this is a person who's going to live to be no more than 100 if you're lucky, and then you're going to die. You and I live in this time frame. We have this mindset. We have this perspective, and so do our wives. And we live in a time that has this cultural expectation.
But let's talk about 250 years.
You cannot talk about
let's
it
talk
personally.
about 250 years.
And I'll go right back to what I said. So 250 years. When do the great grandkids come in? Definitely before 250 years. And so I'm saying that I think that that's the trigger point. At which point that the offspring that you create would begin to lose an emotional connection with them, the offspring that you created with this individual person, because ultimately, you want to get down to the mechanics, that's kind of the purpose of that's sort of the ultimate biological purpose of pairing up, in a traditional sense, is to propagate the species, right? That's what those desires, that's what they're kind of based in. And so, if you put it into those terms,
you're making an argument void of consciousness. I mean, I'm sure a bonobo would feel that way.
No, because you're trying to argue from the perspective of someone who feels about things the way that we do. Again, that's why if you ask me personally, I'll say I don't care how old I'm going to get, I'm going to stay with my wife because that's the mind frame. But if we
were born into a world where people paired up and it was celebrated to be in a committed propagating relationship,
it wouldn't be celebrated
for a certain amount of time, and then it was expected
to break up.
Once you hit the what do we call it?
Let's call it 250.
No, but let's name
threshold.
Let's name the threshold something that sounds cool that the culture can really get behind.
The love milestone.
The love milestone.
The love stone. There's a whole ceremony. There's a stone, and you rub it, and all your friends come.
I think
all your offspring, down to your great grandkids come. Your great grandkids don't come because you don't care about those stupid idiots. There's too many of them.
Right. So
you got hundreds of people already showing up at this freaking thing.
If we were born into that cultural norm where that was celebrated, and then at the love stone, then you part ways amicably or not.
No. You know what would happen at the love stone? First of all, it would be a cultural contract. It would be a societal pact. And what would happen at the love stone agreement is not only would it wouldn't be seen as a breakup. Again, we see all these things in a negative light because of the time that we live in. If you could live to be whatever age and you got to the love stone, what would happen at the love stone ceremony is that the next two people that you were both going to pair off with would be at the love stone ceremony. That's what a love stone ceremony would be. It would be this couple is parting and starting two new couples. And you'd still be friends, but now you start the whole process over again with someone else. And it would be celebrated culturally.
Here's what I'm saying.
It's counter to everything that we think.
But if that were the cultural norm that I was born into and experienced my whole life, I could see that I would fall in line. Because it's just the way it is. If you're taught your whole life that this is the beauty of it, these are the ways to celebrate it. I'm certain I could be convinced of it.
But then there would be a movie. There would be a movie, and it would be a movie about it would be called Turning Over the Love Stone, and it would be about this couple that got to the love stone ceremony, and the new partners were there, and they shunned the new partners, and they started the whole thing over again together, and that would become celebrated as the ideal because that was turning the cultural norm on its head, and it would be seen as incredibly controversial. They moved past the love stone. They're actually talking to their great grandkids. That could also happen.
Yeah, I think there are many people that would want to stay together.
And you and I are two of those people.
Absolutely. It seems like by saying that we're actually saying the opposite.
No, I told you.
And I'm not.
If from a personal perspective.
You tricked me, by the way. You spent the last 15 minutes to get me on your side about this freaking love stone.
Yeah.
And then the moment I'm like, you know what? If I was born into this cultural norm and blah, 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 I could see that I would fall in line. And the moment I said I would fall in line, you're like, and then they'd make a movie, and the awesome thing that I would agree with was someone turning over the love stone.
Yeah, that's
you trapped me, you jerk.
It's the beauty of talking about things that will never come to pass in our lifetime.
It's totally fictitious. You know what can never come to pass? The release of this podcast. We can't release this.
Yes, we can. Now, again,
this has cultural implications in my household. Now, because you tricked me.
Okay, so what you're telling me is that just because if your wife finds out that you said that if it was culturally acceptable for you to only be married to her for like 300 years, that you might call it quits after 300 years, you think she's going to be upset about that?
Well, I wouldn't call it quits. I'd call it the love stone.
Yeah, the love stone. It's all positive. You gotta say, listen, baby, we're talking about a fictitious reality that we started talking about based on Allie B's question that led us to a place where we talked about a time when humans can live indefinitely, where once you get to having great-great-great-grandkids, you have no more capacity to love. And so there's this thing, there's a ceremony called a love stone where you get a new partner. And
You know what she would say?
what would she say?
I told you years ago to get out from under that tall guy's thoughts.
No, what? You act like this isn't my fault. This isn't my fault. I'm just speaking what I believe. What I'm talking about is not what I want, but what I guess would be the truth if this were to come to pass. That's all I'm saying. I say my personal application is
Parking mode
my
off.
best guess as to what would be the cultural norm is that it would change because together forever is based on forever not being that long. But when forever becomes forever, everything we think about commitment will change. And I think that's going to be one of the most significant cultural questions that has to be answered if and when we reach true immortality, which I don't necessarily think is ever going to happen, and I definitely don't think we're going to live to see it, and I don't even think that I would want to be completely honest with you, because I think at some point I'm just going to be ready to check out, even if I do have this amazing 40-year-old body that runs on a 25-year-old treadmill.
Listen, you can't stroll the grocery aisles forever. At some point, you're right, you got to check out. I mean, think about it. That's a good analogy. I mean, I've been in a grocery store, and the last thing I wanted was to stay there forever.
Yeah, but you can go to like a super Walmart. They got more stuff.
It's kind of trashy feeling, though.
I mean, you can go to. There's so many stores.
What do you mean? In my analogy, there's only one store.
The store is not your wife, right? Because
She has everything I need.
Because that wasn't what I was saying. I moved beyond that. I'm going to be in the super Walmart for the rest of my life.
Man, usually at this point I'm like, all right, you let us know what you think, hashtag ear biscuits, but you're not going to listen to this because this has been censored.
Well, here's the thing: is that you're making the assumption that our wives listen to the podcast. They don't. They listen to us. They listen to us.
That's why you are listening to
blabber on about things at home. Why are they gonna choose to just play a digital file of us talking for an hour?
And let's be real, all right?
Yeah.
Who are we to think that they would be offended that we would say that? They'd probably be like, hallelujah.
Yeah.
You think I want to be with you forever?
I think that
I know one of our wives is going to be thinking that.
I think my wife would be. I think she'd be on the same page with me. I think she would say, if that comes to pass, the love stone ceremony, hundreds of years into the future, I get it. It's fine. Wish you the best.
And you know what? Well, we can restone.
Yeah, you can come back again.
Yeah. You have forever.
You have forever, unless you die in a car wreck.
Oh, that's a good point.
Yeah, which is one of the things that I was talking about earlier. But let's just assume that you're living in like this weird bubble suit that you can't die. So that makes things awkward right there. Bubble suit.
Just picture myself walking down the grocery store aisle in a bubble suit. How do I get out of this place?
You can't die. You're in a bubble suit.
You can't fit through the checkout.
Yeah.
All those magazines.
Okay, well, Abby, or that's not your name, Allie B. Hopefully,
You've really dredged it up.
Yeah, I mean, this is all your fault. But hopefully many, many years from now, somebody at a love stone ceremony will dig this up. But the origin of this whole idea. A couple of Nimrods back in 2018 talking out of their buttholes. Hashtag your business.
Breathe in deep.
Because the truth isn't always the best story, the official story isn't always the truth.
Yeah, so they've got a nice theme going where they give the official version of the story another look. They use all this grounded research and then try and figure out what the real truth is. They've got this captivating storytelling. Each episode takes you through these complex stories as if you're really there.
Yeah, the Conspiracy Theories team of researchers investigate complicated and controversial events and then shed light on the possible secrets behind those stories. You can check out the episodes that are covering things like the death of Princess Diana, Area 51. They're all up there now, and they've got new episodes coming out every single Wednesday. And they said in their upcoming episodes, you can expect ones on the Illuminati, chemtrails, and many more.
Visit Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, TuneIn, Spotify, Google Play, or wherever you listen to podcasts and search for Conspiracy Theories. Again, that's CONSPIRACYTHEORIES. Or visit parcast.com/conspiracy to start listening now. That's Parcast, PARCAST.com/conspiracy to listen now.
You're back listening to Mysterious Universe, and we're discussing weird teleportations and disappearances and, of course, time loops. And, when I was just talking about those strange cases, Ben, of children seemingly disappearing, there's reports like that all over the world, but oddly enough, it goes back as far as the 1700s. In the 1700s, 1722, in Germany, there was this little village called Sandfeld. It's in eastern Germany. And there was this strange flap of cases where they called them poltergeist. But I don't think they're necessarily poltergeist. What was happening is something was appearing out of midair, grabbing hold of children and then pulling them up into the air and then holding them there. Now, the kids would flail about and then they'd be dropped back down. But this was occurring over and over until it came to a point where it seemed like the phenomenon was reaching this kind of crescendo because children started just vanishing. But they would vanish for a few seconds and then they'd be dropped walked back.
Oh, wow.
Or it got to the point where it reached its peak, where children would disappear for a number of hours and then pop back on the other side of the home. So there's, obviously some type of history here of these sorts of occurrences going on. But there's a recent case which kind of parallels this stuff. It's from Argentina. It happened in May the 22nd in 2017. It relates to a 13-year-old boy. Now, there's no names that are included in this case, but apparently what happened was that this young boy had gone to sit down with his family for dinner. And as the dinner table had been set and all the family were there, apparently something had been left outside that was required. So the parents said to the 13-year-old boy, "Oh, can you run outside and get that?" And the kid says, "Sure, Mama, I'll go out and get that." He goes up to the door, and the entire family sees him struggling with the door. Even though the door was unlocked, for some reason, the door was stuck. So they it kind of disappears, like it meanders. You can still see the door, but there was a blockage, right? And so what happened was another family member got up and came over and tried to assist him opening the door. The family member went to the door and opened it with ease. There was no problem at all. But when he opened the door and turned around and said, "There you go," the kid was gone. The 13-year-old had just disappeared. Now, he assumed that he'd just simply gone back to the dinner table. He walks back to the dinner table. The kid's not there. Now, they're all starting to get worried because he didn't go outside. There was no way he could have gotten outside. And he's not sitting at the dinner table. He's nowhere else in the house. And there's no way he could have gotten back past them without them seeing him. As they're all standing there in this state of confusion, the phone rings. Now, as the phone rings, I know where you're going, and not who was phone, but they go and answer the phone. And there's this distressed, whimpering voice on the other end of the line. It's the 13-year-old kid that had just disappeared. He's a mile and a half away. Now, this is seconds.
Okay, so he's not dead. I thought this story was going to be another dead kid story.
No, yeah, it's not a dead kid story. It's in a matter of 30 seconds to a minute. This kid has ended up a mile and a half away, standing at a taxi stand with no idea how he got there. Completely dazed, completely confused, very scared and very upset and distressed. Now, he was taken, obviously, to the medical centre and he was examined, and he seemed like he was okay apart from the fact that he was distressed. But later on, when he was interviewed and they were trying to find out what had happened, he said all he knows is that as he was standing there waiting for the family member to open the door, he was engulfed in a blinding light, and then heard a snapping noise, and then when he reopened his eyes, that's when he was standing at the taxi stand. There's some weird random teleportation which happened in 2017. So when you hear all these old cases, you kind of go, oh, you don't hear that anymore because that's just people's imaginations, or that was just stuff that was made up. But I don't know, you're still hearing this stuff happening in modern times. So there's also this other case, which unfortunately I couldn't find many more details, but it does line up with some of the cases that you hear. There was this case in the 1960s, it was 1967 or so, and this British plane had crashed somewhere in northern Africa, in the deserts of northern Africa. Fortunately, they'd been able to report back to the tower, so they knew exactly where they were. And when I say crash, it was more of a controlled crash. They were able to land, and they were fine. Now, they climbed out, but because they're in this desert, they figured the best thing that they could do was start making a beeline for the closest water, because they didn't have any water on them. They start walking, they'd already radioed, their radio was working, they knew that they were coming, so they thought it was safe to leave the aircraft. There was a rescue group that was heading straight towards this crashed plane. When they arrived, the men nowhere to be seen. Now, the men had been walking, and I think, okay, well, we know they're walking, so they start looking at their footprints. So they start following their footprints. There's two sets of foot tracks. They're heading through this desert. Now, yes, I know it's a desert and there's winds and whatever else, but it was only recently. It was only an hour or so I don't think it would have covered up everything. They find perfect tracks until they stop abruptly in the middle of nowhere. They don't turn around, they don't go back, they just stop abruptly, like they've been plucked up from the location. So, does it parallel that case of the guy from...
So
I'm definitely going to keep this case where a guy had travelled to this archaeological site that seemed to be the remains of Troy, and there was no one else around, but when he was there, he could hear this sound of like a Bronze Age flute. That's right. That was coming through, yeah. So I don't want to go into that case, but there was one case from Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. Another hotspot, and of course, people say that Gettysburg is a hotspot for paranormal activity because such horrible things happen there. So maybe it's like the stone tape theory that because there was so much emotion and death and whatever else, that's somehow recorded in the ground. But now that we're seeing that maybe this is a window area, maybe this is an exit area, maybe there's something very special about this spot that allows phenomena to occur. Well, there was a story of a young man and his middle-aged man, his 6-year-old son, and they were attending this at junior. Now, and they look up, and here's Lincoln, a reenactor reading out this, doing his speech. It was just incredible. That's so accurate. Well, that's the thing. And they said this was so amazing, but then all of a sudden, as the father was standing looking, he's like, oh, he is tall, but no, they didn't get the hair quite right, and they didn't get the hat right.
Stop moving them.
Yeah,
you suck.
They're very patriarchal.
I can see your fake beard.
Yeah, they had no intention of doing that, but yeah, the father was kind of a little bit let down. But later on, so they actually walked up to him. They walked up to him, and just jokingly, he said, well, Mr. President, how's the war going? And apparently the actor fell straight back into character, and he said, I fear it will never end, and he sighed, and he just melted away into the crowd after kind of, scruffing the boy on the hair and saying good. So they were leaving. Now, as they were leaving, the organizer just starts looking at him, and the organizer said, what are what are you talking about? And he said, no, there was Lincoln. He had a tall guy, although he didn't get the hat right, he didn't get the face right, it wasn't kind of the same thing. The organizer says, we didn't have a Lincoln presenting anything today. And he says, no, but you did. I saw it. He's like, no, open up your guide. Now he's holding his form guide, his play guide in his hand. He's going through it, looking for it. There's no address by Lincoln. There's nothing. He can't find it. So he goes running back to the location where that's it, where everything had been set up. There were these red and white and blue ribbons, and everything has been set up in this beautiful style. None of it was there. It was just a plain field.
Then who was president?
Well, then who was president? Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, it seems like they genuinely had a time slip back to the actual address at Gettysburg, which is in itself just an incredible experience, on top of the fact that it's a time slip.
Or you did mention phantom social workers at the start of the show. This could be phantom historical impersonators just turning up and doing recreations.
But then who would create a stage and then put up all ribbons?
He does. That's how obsessed he is. He just builds it, takes it down, he does it every weekend.
So it's like phantom war reenacted with OCD or something.
Yeah.
Okay, I can understand that. But finally, I just wanted to mention this case that I like to call, it's like a groundhog time loop. And this relates to a couple, Larry Miller and his wife Claire. Now, they were driving from Chicago, this little suburb of Chicago, to meet some relatives in New Mexico. This happened in early spring of 1983. Now, they were traveling through a southwestern section of Missouri. It was Interstate 44, but it turns out that it was closed. But because it was closed, they thought, okay, fine, there's all these signs for detours. So they thought, well, we had no other option, so they took the detour. Now, as they took the detour, they're actually quite excited because they were coming across what they thought, it was about half an hour later, they came across the small, charming little town. It had this shops, friendly-looking diner, it had this beautiful painting in the front of it, big glass windows, and there was this really inviting, casual atmosphere. They said the main square was dominated with this well-preserved City Hall tall brick tower, and they said they could see people that were playing and talking, and there was a young red-haired woman who was pushing a stroller around the park. There were kids playing hopscotch, and it was just a nice, pretty town. And they thought, when you're on the expressways, you don't see these towns anymore. You don't see these places. So they decide that they're not going to stop because they have to go out and see their friends or their family. But they noticed how big this clock was, and this clock face had Roman numerals on it. And the time said it was 1:30, but see, she thought that was odd because her watch said 3 o'clock. But it's like, oh, they've got their time out. He's like, oh, well, who cares? So they keep on driving, and they get out of this town. Now, as they're driving out of this town, they come across another little town. But it's kind of odd because it was built in the same way. And the husband actually says, Larry says to Claire, he's like, oh, these places, they're all the same. Like, yeah, they're quaint and nice, but they're all exactly the same. But Claire gets a little bit disturbed because she looks up and she can see exactly the same tower. She starts looking and she realizes, but the time on the tower, instead of saying 1:30, it now says 12:30. It's like it's out by another hour, but yet they've been traveling for another half an hour. So as she's looking, she starts dawning on her that, oh, that's really, really similar. Keep driving again. Now, as they keep driving, they come back into a little town. They slow down because, of course, there's the signs to slow down as you come into a town. And this time it strikes Claire. She starts screaming. She's, look, the woman that was a redhead pushing a pram is exactly the same woman doing it again. She's pushing this pram. Now, Larry is hysterical. He's like, calm down. You're just being hysterical. No, the woman, she's pushing the pram. I saw her before. And the kid's doing hopscotch. Oh, the clock. And the clock is out by another hour going back. And so he thinks that he's obviously he mustn't, without realizing and not paying attention, he must be driving around in circles.
Yeah, he's making a wrong turn somewhere.
Exactly. So what he does is he makes sure that he stays on this straight road. He keeps on following the straight road. And of course, as he's following the straight road, they pull into another little town. As they pull into a little town, here's the kids with hopscotch again. Here's the woman in the red hair pushing the pram. The clock is out by another hour.
So hang on, is the clock's going back an hour?
Going back an hour.
Each time. So they're going back in time.
It's like they're going back
in
time, in space. So there's a physics kind of idea about what's happening here. I wasn't going to use it for the tagline, but it's called, I like to call it a singularity, or the event horizon time loop. Because if you were, let's say you were a spaceship of some kind, and you got stuck in the event horizon of a black hole, and before you're sucked into it, if you tried to travel away from that singularity, if you tried to get away from that black hole, and you were traveling at more than the speed of light, trying to escape it, what would actually happen is that even though you're traveling in a straight direction, it's possible that you'll be flung around and dragged straight back into that event horizon. So you can never leave. So no matter what you do, you're getting away, you're traveling away, but you're always coming back to the exact same location. This seems to be what's happening with these two, Larry and Claire.
This town is not a black hole.
No, it's not, but maybe the same kind of physics applies. Maybe it's the same kind of concept. So by this time, even though he'd been calling his wife a hysterical woman, Larry is now a hysterical man. He's screaming, they're both... So he figures the only way to get the hell out of here is to put his foot down. He puts his foot down. He makes sure he's at 80 miles an hour. He's at 80 miles an hour. He doesn't care.
What's the logic in that?
I don't know. He thinks that maybe going faster, he'll be able to get... He doesn't care if
he get up to 88.
Yeah, he doesn't care if he runs into anyone. He just keeps... He wants to get the hell out of there. Of course, as they're speeding along, they're back into the town again. Screw this! He puts his foot down again. Now he's at 120. Screaming along. No, they pull straight back into the town yet again, till finally he pushes the car up to 180 miles an hour, which is almost impossible. The car is absolutely flying flying. Like, that's what, 220 kilometers? It's crazy. Like, the car is at the top.
Top speed. It's
Top
shaking.
speed was shaking. It's
Yeah.
revving out. Until finally, he sees a detour sign coming up on the road and just on the horizon. And then he realizes that, he slows down. They both stop panicking. That somehow made it back onto the interstate. So when they drove, they told their family what happened. Their family didn't believe them. When they drove back, they couldn't find the entrance from that detour anymore. So wherever they were, they'd gone into some type of weird time slip loop. And of course, there were hours that were missing. They were experiencing hours of missing time as well. So not necessarily an abduction there, but some type of time distortion or something else that was going on.
If they're going back in time, wouldn't it be possible for them to stay in the town and then see a version of themselves drive through?
I hadn't thought of that. That's actually you're right. I mean, if they pulled over and waited for them to drive through.
So that's how you actually break the loop. You wait for the copies of you to drive through, you murder them, and then you can get out.
Wouldn't that cause some type of retro causality or something, or cause some time?
No, trust me,
or...
I'm an expert on these things.
I don't like temporal mechanics. I can never get my head around it. So I mean, it's just very, very weird. And I guess that these cases just demonstrate that we don't really understand the nature of the reality that we live in. And while these cases, especially like missing 411, while David Paulides, for example, never gives any kind of indication as to what might be happening there. I think what people drop into when you hear these cases, whether it's missing 411, missing children, all this kind of stuff, that there's something sinister behind it. That there's some type of intelligence that's plucking people from here, but maybe not. I mean, when you hear that case of the time loop, maybe there's just something about our reality that we don't understand. When people are just getting trapped in other dimensions, in other time loops, and other, here we go, wandering, what did I call them? Wandering chrono holes.
Chrono holes, finally!
Okay, so...
All the missing kids, it's like Kevin Spacey's chrono hole.
What? Oh!
Too soon. Too soon, sorry. Delete that, please.
I don't think you ever had anything to do with kids.
Edit that out, please. That's terrible.
Well, you've derailed me yet again, but speaking about derailing, we are going to be talking about phantom trains because as I was looking for more teleporting stories, time loop stories, I picked up Our Holographic World, The Shocking Truth About Time and Reality. It's by Anthony Milne. And I was going through there, I came across this chapter called Phantom Transporters. And as I was looking into Phantom Transporters, he starts referencing the great work of Paul Stonehill. Now, I'm a huge fan of Paul Stonehill's work. I think he's absolutely fantastic. If you're not familiar with him, I'll link to him in the show notes so you can see his YouTube videos. He's published a couple of books. He's a former Russian, I shouldn't say former, I think he lives though, he doesn't live in Russia
He's
anymore.
American.
He's American.
A Russian-born.
Yeah, Russian-born researcher.
So when you talk to him, he's like...
He's been on the show, and I don't think that's how he spoke. He's a very, very, very lovely man. But anyway, as I was looking through the book by Anthony Milne, he starts describing the strange research that's been conducted by Paul about Eurasian phantom trains. But it's not what I was expecting, because I was kind of expecting, like, as I said,
spooky stories,
spooky trains, and the clattering of the old rails roaring past.
It was glowing green.
Grandma's pantaloons were blown off. So that kind of stuff. No, it was nothing like that at all. It starts off with this tale, but this tale seems to have some type of, I don't know, there's all these there's no proof, obviously, but there's all these little elements that fit in that make you go, maybe something's going on here. So it goes back to, there was this guy that was known as the Russian Dickens. He was this great author, very, very great author. And his name was Nikolai Gogol. And as he was, publishing books or whatever, apparently he became quite strange. He became quite weird. And it was almost like he was possessed by demons or something, or because he was interested in paranormal phenomena, but it got the best of him. And it's alleged that he died in this state of craziness. But what started happening was there was all this political turmoil that was going on in the region at the time, and the cemetery was actually bulldozed. And his coffin was brought up, and when his coffin was brought up, this great Russian writer, it was found that there was all scratch marks inside the coffin. So he'd actually been buried alive, which is really, really horrible. But that's beside the point. But it just adds to the unusualness of this case. But anyway, so this is around 1909, and apparently, somehow, during his coffin being brought up, this really eccentric Russian theatrical collector stole his skull. So apparently this Russian guy was really eccentric, and he liked playwrights and actors and writers and tried to get parts of them to keep them for his collection. Now, because of course, the political turmoil at this time, the military knew about this guy and what he was doing, and because he'd gotten hold of this skull of this great Russian writer, so we want the skull back or we'll shoot you where you stand. He's like, okay, yeah, well, I don't have it at the moment, I can get it to you. So the skull was actually brought by a courier that was it was supposed to be presented to the Russian consul general, and this guy had a younger brother. So this Russian general, he had a younger brother in the spring of 9/11, or 1911. His younger brother was in Italy, and his younger brother said to him, can I borrow the skull because I want to scare some of my friends? I mean, why would you do that? But regardless, this skull of this great writer had been entrusted to this guy, and he gave it to his brother. So they were down in Italy, and this younger brother took the skull, and it was in this kind of coffin state, box. And as he was sitting on this train, he was going to open it up and scare all of his friends. This train is moving along, and as the train is moving along, all of a sudden, this brother, he was overwhelmed with fear and worry and anxiety and this horrible, horrible feeling, so much so that it caused like this feeling of madness. He went running from the train to the back of the train where there was this section where the door would open to the platform. Of course, there's no platform, the train's moving along, and he jumps from the train. What? He jumped from the train and went rolling. Now, when he jumped from the train and went rolling, the feeling seemed to dissipate. And he's thinking, why did I do that? What the hell am I doing? Why did I jump from a moving train?
Did he break his neck?
No, he was fine. He wasn't traveling that fast,
Okay.
but he was overwhelmed by this feeling. But he looks up and he sees this train heading into a tunnel. He says, as he's thinking, how the hell am I going to get back? The train is enveloped in this thick white fog, this incredibly thick white, glowing, bleach white fog, and the train disappeared. The train just disappeared into this fog and is gone. There were 106 people on that train. It was a pre-World War II era train, obviously. It was not a Russian design. It was a steam train. Investigators went into the tunnel. They couldn't even find the soot on the ceiling of this train.
So it's not a ghost train. It's not like a train that was in a horrible accident and then shows up in spectral form.
No.
It just disappears.
It just disappears.
It's going through a chrono hole.
Exactly. So, well, I'll get to the chrono hole in a moment. So as he jumped from the train, another person had jumped as well, having a feeling. So 106 people were on this train. 2 of them had jumped, so 104 people just simply disappeared with this train. Now, the tunnel was actually sealed when it was struck with a bomb in World War II, and not much else came of it until later on these strange little details started coming up. So this was in 1911, but all throughout the Russian train network, throughout Siberia and, crossing the entire country, we're talking about, tens of thousands of miles of track, people started seeing this weird train showing up. This train, this steam train would appear, going all the way until the 1990s. People would not expect to see this train would just appear with 3 carriages at the back and steam at the front. And it just looks like a normal, completely normal train. But it was crisscrossing everywhere. The sightings were happening in the 1960s, 1970s, all over the country, but it didn't seem to interact with anyone else. Where some things started happening, for example, there was a guy that was actually standing by the edge of the track one day. He was a train conductor. He said that he was waiting for a diesel train to approach so he could change the signal. As this diesel train was approaching, he hears the sound of this steam engine. He turns around to look, and he can see this old steam train heading straight towards the oncoming diesel freight train. Now, he starts waving his arms, trying to stop, knowing that there's going to be a collision, but right when there's about 100 meters difference between them, the train just dematerializes before him. Now, the guy that was driving the diesel engine witnessed this as well. So you've got 2 people that have seen it. There's also a report from the 1940s where a soldier had just finished up in the Second World War, and what he had done is he bought a trip to get home on the train, but the train wasn't leaving until the following morning. Now, he only had enough money to pay for the train trip and not for any accommodation that night. So he walks up to one of the conductors on this train and says, is there any chance that I could just sleep in one of the carriages tonight? Like, I've just come back from war. And the guy's like, yeah, sure, not a problem at all. That's not a problem. And they had this area that's sort of further towards the back of the train yard where it's called the R&R. It's like for the repair of trains. And the guy doesn't give him any details. He says, if you just go over there, you'll find that there's 3 carriages, and inside that carriage, you can just hop in and you'll be able to sleep in there. So the guy thanks him, and he walks over to this train. Now, as he walks over to the train, it hasn't been described to him, but he says, this is an old train. This is old. This thing is just parked there. It's a steam train, but there's 3 carriages. So he walks up to it, and he puts his hand onto the handle. Now, when he puts his hand onto the handle, he's electrocuted and blown backwards. So, now, when he's blown backwards, he kind of jumps up and wakes up, not understanding what's happening, thinking that maybe somehow the train had been electrified. It just starts to shimmer and then disappear before him. The guy obviously was completely freaked out. He reported it, and there's no more details as to what happened to him there. But again, you have these cases of these trains that are popping up. But where things start to become a little bit unusual is that just a little
It's not unusual already.
No, even more.
This is where it starts to get strange. Everything up till now has been totally normal.
This has been completely normal. This happens all the time. So even as recently as 1991, there were reports of phantom trains. So there was actually a guy, this came from the Persolovo region. Apparently it's in upper Ukraine. But there were a group of people that were at a crossing, and they'd come to this old train crossing, and unfortunately they'd come across a dead body. This body had been blown apart. They said there were 7 meters of sleepers where there was blood all over the sleepers. The body was completely mutilated and torn apart, and the 2 women that were there fainted, and everyone and they went and reported it. What was really strange is that the coroner concluded that without a doubt the body had been struck by a train. For the body to be torn apart in the fashion that it was consistent with the train traveling at high velocity or high speed. But the only problem is that train line hadn't been used in 20 years, and the nearest actual train line was 20 kilometers away. So there's no way the guy could have been hit by a train 20 kilometers away and then move that way and not have blood everywhere and whatever else.
Oh my god. Who was trained?
So then in 1950 in the Balaclava region, there was a train that had gone across this old embankment. Now, there were a group of men that were sitting down and they were watching, And they were just in shock, not because of the fact that this train was moving across this old embankment. It was an actual physical train. The rails had been ripped up 25 years previously, but somehow this train was still traveling along it. So where things become even stranger, and this is where the scientific explanation apparently comes in, is that a group of Russian researchers in connection with the KGB, was in 1975, 1981, 1985, and 1992, when all these sightings had happened, started looking into this, and apparently they were really concerned about why this was occurring. People are dying, these trains are appearing, but what was happening is that because of the Cold War, the Russians established one of the most sophisticated counter-strike nuclear weapon systems that has ever been seen. The Americans actually spent more money monitoring it than what it cost to build it. This is just how amazing this thing was. What it was a network of initially 12 trains that went to 16 trains that were fitted out with nuclear missiles. These trains look like normal trains, like normal passenger trains. They had fake windows with fake blinds on them. They look like normal passenger trains, but they could travel 1,000 kilometers a day completely undetected and were designed to respond in a counter-strike fashion.
Clever.
So, and this is the way the system was established, that if, of course, they were struck by any type of missile, they would be able to deploy this train anywhere, and apparently these missiles could reach tens of kilometers. There was only ever one test that was researchers. One of these scientists that works in topology, so apparently this is the study of spatial objects. It's a purely mathematical field, and he was also connected to a railroads expert or whatever else. They started to speculate that this is what was causing the train to appear at random locations all around the Soviet network or the Russian network. It was because what had happened was there was a terrible earthquake that happened in Italy. It happened on the 28th of December in 1908. Approximately 100,000 people perished. But according to their research, this earthquake was so large that it caused a crack in the chronofield near Italy.
What?
Now, this crack was so large that as it was traveling through this overlaying layer, which the Russians called the chronofield, it moved up the mountain and then entered into the tunnel at the same time that the train was entering into the tunnel. Right. The train didn't leave the tracks. The train didn't disappear. It went into the chrono hole. It disappeared into this chrono hole.
It all makes sense now.
And what happens is that the object, so this is the actual term here, this is what they said. Because of the movement of the object was being defined by the spatial coordinates, the railroad tracks in inverted commas, the object will only appear where tracks have existed in the past or where tracks will exist in the future.
Oh, weird.
So that case, where the train appeared, where the rails had been ripped up, of course it's going to, because at some point the rails had been there.
Right.
Now, where this becomes just mind-blowing is it all comes back to these lost reports that came from Mexico. You're like, hang on, this happened in Italy.
What's going on,
the Russians. What the hell's happening here? It's involving a Russian skull. This is crazy. So further research revealed that there was a Mexican, he was a psychologist or a psychiatrist, sorry, and he had been working in 1912 or 1911 in this facility, the psychiatric facility. Now, he had made detailed notes of all the years of his research, so obviously this didn't come out until well after his death and well after this case. In his notes, he describes a very strange case, where he claims he treated 104 hysterical people speaking a foreign language that claimed that they arrived in Mexico on a train. It was the same time where the chrono hole had sucked the train in these Mexican psychiatrist papers. It's just mind-blowing!
So what does this have to do with the guy's skull that's dug up?
That's the thing. That's
nothing to do with it.
Nothing. This is how. That's the only reason why Paul Stonehill got looking into the research,
Right.
because he was hearing about this skull of this weird guy, which happened to be on the train. But it wasn't that there was anything paranormal connected to the skull. It was just by sheer coincidence that the train went into a wandering chrono hole.
Okay, so let me get this straight. The guy, there's a train that goes into a chrono hole in Russia.
Yes.
Which the chrono hole's been created by a distortion in the chrono field because of an earthquake in Italy.
Yes.
Right? And the train has gone through the chrono hole and somehow ended up in Mexico. Question: when it's ended up in Mexico, how has it gone on train tracks in Mexico?
Well, that's the outlying thing, exactly. So there's no answer there. So I get the whole scientific perspective. That's the thing, right? That's not being quoted by the KGB report. That's just an anecdote that Paul has uncovered when he's gone through. So yeah, it doesn't fit the model of the train appearing on those train tracks, but it does explain.
Unless in some future time period, like in 1,000 years, there's this amazing rail network that connects Russia to Mexico.
Look, it's just strange, right? Because unless it's made up, right? Regardless of if it's that train. I mean, this guy, his papers, he claims that he treated 104 people, which is precisely the number of people that disappeared.
I don't doubt it.
It's just so strange. Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm not the one I'm telling the story, but I'm not the one that's reporting. I mean, this is coming from Paul Stonehill and from other researchers. So where, of course, this becomes unusual.
Strange. Where this story becomes strange.
It already is strange. I know I've been saying that a lot. No, but where it becomes...
Where this story becomes a little bit out of the ordinary.
Well, I've been doing this for a long time, man. Nothing really is strange.
All this is normal.
This is why I must say that, because I really have enjoyed, hearing these stories. It's crazy kind of stuff. But there was also, oddly enough, this train. So as the Russians were looking into this research, apparently the metro, the Moscow metro, which